بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing our reading of the work, the poem منظومة الآداب الشرعية الصغرى of Imam Ibn Abdul-Qawwi Al-Hanbali rahimahullah. We stopped last week in line number 50, so we'll go from there inshallah. But before we begin, there was a question from last week which we didn't take, and we'll begin with that one. And the question has to do with relatives. And so the questioner says that how do we advise family relatives that say that when we invite them or they invite us to our houses that this house is also your home, so you don't need to seek permission to do things inside of here. And so they may take it as disrespect if you were to ask permission to go into this room or that room. So we say that if they give you family members who are relatives but they're not your own family, immediate family, we need to seek permission to enter their homes and do things inside their home. But if they give you permission, that this is your house, do whatever you want in here, then inshallah, you have no sin if you live and you use their house and you do what you want in there because He gave you permission. So the idea is that if family members give you a blanket permission, if anyone gives you permission that this is your space, you can do whatever you want here, you can take from here and there, then you have the general idhn, the general permission to do what you want as if it's your house. So that's how you can deal with it. But until they give you that general permission, then we should not just go about doing that unless we get permission. طيب, we'll start with line 50. I believe the brothers have the explanation, the translation with them. The author says, rahimahullah, وَكُلُّ قِيَامٍ لَا لِوَالٍ وَعَالِمٍ وَوَالِدِهِ أَوْ سَيِّدٍ كُرْهُهُ imhadi. And every standing that occurs for other than for a ruler or a scholar or a parent or a leader of the people is disliked, so accept this, and accept the fact that it's disliked. And what he means by this is that what's the ruling on standing up for people when they enter? What's the ruling on standing up for people to give them greetings and things like this? And so here we take a chapter from the chapters of Adab, which is the Ahkam al-Qiyam or Wuquf. The Ahkam of Qiyam, standing, and Wuquf, and remaining standing for people. And so here the author says it is not allowed. Yani kurhahu means disliked to stand for anyone except a ruler, scholar, parent, or leader of a people. So what the ulama, they say now, that standing is not of one category. It's many types. So inshallah I'm going to mention now the categories of standing. Because in order to understand when are you allowed to stand up for someone and when you're not allowed, you need to categorize standing as being different types, not one type. And so the author, he said generally is disliked besides these, because there's adillah, evidence to show that you could stand up for a ruler. Again, not always, but there's with conditions. Standing up for a scholar, for the parent, right? So parent, child to parent. Sayyid, master or leader of a people. So the Shaykh Ibn Abdul Qaadir gave a general ruling of dislike. But the ulama, what they do to make it easier for you to understand, they give you and give all of us categories. And so we're going to mention the categories now so that you have this understanding with you. Otherwise, you might think that all standing is haram or all standing is allowed, and it's actually not the case. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cite now Shaykh Imam al-Sa'di rahimahullah. Imam Sa'di, in one of his fatawa, one of his benefits, in a book called Majmu' al-Fawaid, مجموع الفوائد والاقتناص الأوابد, page 65. He mentions ruling on standing up for people. He says, there is three types of standing. Al-qiyamu lil-rajuli, wal-qiyamu ilayhi, wal-qiyamu alayhi. So there's three types, very important. Standing up for a person. Standing up for a person. Lil-rajuli. That's the first category. Second, standing up to go towards a person. Wal-qiyamu ilayhi is to stand up to go towards somebody. Okay, that's the second one. And the third one, wal-qiyamu alayhi, standing up in the presence of someone. So again, three types. Al-qiyamu lil-rajuli, so you stand up for someone. The next one, you stand up to go towards someone. And the third one, you stand up and you remain standing in the presence of someone. So the Shaykh Imam Sa'di says now, each of them has a different ruling. You have to differentiate. Now we're going to give examples. First category, we said standing up for somebody. It's makruh, it's disliked. And if it doesn't include any type of haram, then it's just disliked. But if it includes something haram, for example, somebody is standing up for someone who is not worthy to stand up for. Right? Because why do you stand up for someone? Takreeman lahu, as an honor for him. So if it's someone you're standing up for deserving that, it's just makruh in the original ruling. Example, standing up for an alim, a scholar, your parents, etc. If it doesn't include any haram, he says it's makruh. He says it's makruh if it includes haram. Without haram, mubah. So let me correct myself. If it's haram, it's makruh if it includes something which is wrong. Okay? And it's also makruh unless doing so, right, it's very important, unless if you didn't do it, something wrong will happen. You disrespect someone, let's say. In the case, for example, you didn't stand up for them, a mafsada is going to happen. In that case, it's also okay. But the general ruling, default ruling is makruh. It's makruh. How about standing for the ulama? Isn't it something good? We know the ulama, they are deserving of being stood up for in the sense of honoring them. But it's still not the best thing to do Islamically, because we'll see how we're supposed to deal with the ulama. Allah, the Messenger ﷺ taught us. So the first category, to stand up for someone, what's the general ruling? Disliked. If it includes something haram in there, it's not allowed either. If it's done in order to deflect the harm, it's permissible. But, as we'll see, that there is evidence to show that you can stand up for your mother, your father, but it has to be because you're only honoring them. That's it. Okay, we're going to get to it more later. Okay, that's the first one. That's why Ibn Abdul-Qawwi says disliked. Because in reality, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the best person, right? Did the Sahaba used to stand up for him? No. See, the Rasul is most deserving to be stood up for him, but they never stood up for him because they knew how much he didn't like people standing up for him. Number two, standing up to go towards a person. Here, the Imam Sa'di says, this kind of standing, for example, someone came back from a travel, so you got up to greet them, you got up to, speak to them, to hug them, to welcome them. And other examples like that, no haraj. There's no blame in that. Because you're standing towards them, to get up towards them. You're not standing up for their case. So for example, someone came back from a travel, your relative, your friend, and you were sitting down, you got up to go hug them or to welcome them. It's okay. It's different, right? Different than the first category. Because you're going towards them, you're only standing up in order to greet them and welcome them. Third category is to stand up for a person in their presence. So when they walk in, you stand and you remain standing while they sit. This one is haram. This is the one that Islam says is haram. To stand up for a person in the sense that when they enter, you stand and you remain standing in their presence. This is the way of the non-Muslims. When the kings would like people to stand up for them, and they will sit down. Not allowed. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam cleared the hadith, he prohibited this, and that's why the Sahaba never did this for him. So if we understand these different types, now we can understand that sometimes standing for people is allowed, Other times it's not allowed, and sometimes just disliked. Now examples. So Shaykh Abdul Salam al-Burjis, rahimahullah, or Burjis, rahimahullah, he has a nice work on Ahkam al-Salam. Ahkam al-Salam, the etiquette of giving salam. And he has, in that same book, benefits regarding standing up for people and meaning them. So it gives examples now. For example, standing up in order to help somebody who is unable to stand up or is having difficulty. It's okay. He brings the hadith to show that you can do that. For example, somebody, you see them, they're having a hard time doing something, you got up in order to aid them. No sin in that. Another example he gives, child standing up for their parent. Hadith Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, Hadith Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha fi Bukhari wal Muslim. Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he mentions here, Aisha says in the Hadith Ifk, فَقَالَتْ لِي أُمِّي. When the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came, my mother said to me, قُومِي إِلَيْهِ, stand up towards the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Sorry, stand up for Abu Bakr. Stand up for Abu Bakr. Another hadith talks about Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. When Fatima used to visit him, she would come to the house, and when she entered the door, Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would stand up towards her, kiss her hand and sit her in his place, and vice versa. Child to parent, parent to child. Permissible. So this will be which category? This one will be the second category, because you stood up to greet them. As for the first category, we'll mention another example. Standing up when you're somebody of authority or someone of leadership enters. Right? So Rasulullah told the Sahaba once to stand up, the Ansar to stand up for the leader of their tribe. And the prohibited one we said was the one standing up in the presence of someone. Right? The Rasulullah clearly prohibited. Hadith Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala anhuma. The Rasulullah said, whoever loves the people, stand up for him. Whoever loves the people or the servants of Allah, stand up for him, let him take his seat in hellfire. Hadith Muslim, Imam Ahmed and Abu Dawood. Where the khilaf of the ulama now comes, standing up for someone when you see them. So for example, you're sitting in the majlis, somebody walks in, and you're already in the majlis. They're not a traveler, they're not a guest, they're not someone you're going to go greet because they're not coming in. Can I get up and greet them as soon as they come in by standing? Here the ulama have khilaf. Some of them said no, it goes into the third category. You're standing up for their sake, haram. Others have said it's allowed because you're standing to greet them. But the problem is they're not coming from a travel or the likes that you need to stand up for them. You see the point? So from here the scholars disadvise that. If someone walks into a gathering, we're all sitting down, don't get up for them. Say Salamu alaikum, let them greet you and sit. Unless we said you're going up towards them to greet them because they came from a travel or a guest, someone, this is different. And this is where the Khilafah, Shaykh Burjisi says the opinion is haram to do that last one. Because we're already sitting, we saw him and we got up. Why? What reason is there? So the best way to avoid any confusions, when you're standing up with a person, remember which of the three are you doing, and also ask yourself, which one of these three is permissible? I.e., what am I doing? Which is it permissible? And is it better not to do it? But if you fear mafsada, then you should tell yourself, like we said, if I'm standing up for the sake of someone to honor them, and they're deserving of honor, it is different. But just like we said now, some of the ulama, why did they say standing up when you see a person coming to a gathering is wrong? Is because when you stand up for them, maybe you stood up for one person, then another person came, no one stood up. You see, another person feels hurt. They stood up for him, not for me. And then imagine it. Every time someone comes in, we're all standing up. All right? Our majlis is just going to be standing up and sitting down. So this is why they say also doesn't help benefit. So just keep that in mind, and therefore it's not always wrong to stand. It's not always right to stand up for people. And you have to also weigh in, right, the situation. That's what the Imam is trying to tell us, and that's a summary of the issue. طيب. The author now continues. He says in line 51, وَصَافِحْ لِمَنْ تَلْقَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ تَنَاثَرْ خَطَايَاكُمْ كَمَا فِي الْمُسَنَّدِ. And shake their hands is the one whom you meet of every Muslim. or in terms of every Muslim. Your sins will fall down as is found in the Musnad, i.e. the reported narration. Here the Shaykh is telling us about the etiquette of greeting people. Salam we talked about before. Now we're going to talk about the etiquette of shaking someone's hand. Shaking someone's hand when you meet them is min tamamul tahiyya. Min itmam at-tahiyya. Right? It comes in some ahadith. Min tamamul tahiyya al-musafaha. Al-musafaha. From the completion of the greetings is to greet with the hand. Shake your hands. And it's completion, which means it's not wajib. It's recommended though to shake hands because of the hadith of Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. إذا التقى مسلمان فتصافحا تناثرت خطاياهما كما يتناثر ورق الشجرة. That if two Muslims meet one another and shake their hands, their sins will fall from their hands like how the leaves fall from a tree. It's encouragement them to shake hands. And what I mean by this is a Muslim man with a Muslim man and a Muslim woman, Muslim woman. As for the opposite gender shaking hands, we'll get to that at the end. And it's not allowed, and what kind of discussion happened, or the scholars discuss or differ on that. Another hadith says something similar, that ما من مسلمين يلتقيان فيتصافحان إلا غفر لهما قبل أن يتفرقا. Two Muslims don't meet one another and shake their hands except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives them when they part their ways. So these hadith encourage us to shake the hand. Now comes the question, what is the etiquette or the manners of shaking someone's hand? Means, how should I shake someone's hand? The correct way of doing it is to shake with your right hand and put your right hand in the right hand of another person. One hand is sunnah. Shaking with two hands is permissible, but it's not the sunnah. Okay? It's not the sunnah, it's permissible, but. Alright, so this is important to understand. And the proof for that is the hadith Shaykh Al-Bani, he brings in Sahihah. Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, one day, a man told him that he's deciding or planning to travel. So he said, let me give you farewells. So he said, give me your hand. He took his hand, he put it in his hand, and he read the dua, أستودعكم الله دينك وأمانتك وخواتم عملك. Here Shaykh Al-Bani, amongst other evidences he brings, rahimahullah, he says from here we learn benefit. الأخذ بيد الواحدة في المصافحة. Taking with one hand, one greeting. Because Ibn Umar took his one hand and he shook it. And he said this. Because he's parting ways with him, farewell, the man's traveling. We also take from this that shaking hands on the way, when leaving and departing, is also recommended. Everyone knows when you greet, when you're leaving, you can also shake hands, and this is Dalil. Fi Sahihah, volume 1, page 23, the Shaykh says that shaking hands and parting, it is itself legislated and recommended. Not like some people think that it's a bid'ah. It's not a bid'ah, it's allowed. As for shaking hands after the salah, the Shaykh mentioned that that's a bid'ah. Some Muslims, they do that after salah. Taqabbalullah, that's bid'ah. Min qadeem, akhi, it's old. Right, old bid'ah. If you go to the books of bid'ah, it's there. So sometimes Muslims, they do that, it's a mistake. But this is the etiquette to show you that. Shaking in the beginning, when you meet, and both are recommended. As for shaking with two hands, then we said it's not sunnah. Like it's not haram, hadith. It's not hadith athar في Bukhari. That he has a chapter, Bab al-Akhdhu bil-Yad wa safaha Hammad bin Zayd ibn Mubarak biyadayhi. Hammad bin Zayd shook the hand of Abdullah Mubarak with both of his hands. Hammad bin Zayd is Imam from Salaf, and Abdullah Mubarak, we all know, Imam from Salaf. So Hammad bin Zayd shook with two hands. So it's permissible, but in Bukhari, what he's indicating there, and the narration comes with a full chain in his Tariq. So here we see that it's permissibility, but not sunnah. So some madhabs, they do that, or some people do two hands, but the sunnah is one hand. Now, when it comes to shaking the hand, the Shaykh said that it's something which is, you should do. I recommend it. And ayah 52, he says, وَلَيْسَ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ حَلُّ سُجُودَنَا وَيُكْرَهُ تَقْبِيلُ الثَّرَى بِتَشَدُّدِ. So the author, he moves on to another issue. Again, this is all to do with social interactions. He says, And it is not allowed to prostrate to another person other than Allah, or another other than Allah. It's not allowed to prostrate to other than Allah. And it's disliked, severely disliked, to kiss the ground upon which someone is standing. So now when we meet one another in Islam, we're not allowed to bow. We're not allowed to make sujood. As Muslims, how do we greet one another? Islam has told us. So what is the Shaykh saying here? Prostrating to another person when greeting them is haram in Islam. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, لو أمرت أحدا أن يسجد لأحد لأمرت المرأة أن تسجد لزوجها. If I were to command anyone, and the key word here is if. He didn't say I did. Some people when they read these ahadith, they don't have the qawaid. They read the hadith. Why Rasulullah said this? They say, well, if. He didn't say it's shartiyya, right? If. And it's also to show the importance of the husband's right over the wife. I explained it in the notes on feminism. Some people, when their mind is not correct, they don't know what they're talking about. We're going to get to it. Rasulullah said, if I were to command anyone to prostrate to anyone, or prostrate a woman to prostrate, or command a woman to prostrate to her husband. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, if. He didn't say we have to. All right? And of course, the hadith doesn't indicate that anyways. Like in one of the biggest problems people have, sujood as a tahiyyah. Does it exist? Sujood is of two types. It's very important. Sujood is not one type. Some people think when they say sujood, this hadith, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is telling a woman to worship a husband. La hawla wa la quwwata billah. Do you know there's something called sujood al-tahiyyah, the sujood of greeting? That's the one he was talking about, alayhi salatu wasalam, not the other one. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam not calling to shirk, right? SubhanAllah, some people read the hadith, why did Rasulullah command a woman to prostrate to her husband? Tahiyyatan or ibadatan? What do you think he was trying to say? Because some people, they don't know. So is there such thing as greeting people as a greeting? Or making prostration as a greeting? Yes. Right? We all know the story of Surah Yusuf. And Allah says, and he raised his parents to the throne, and they fell down before him prostrate. All right, Surah Yusuf, ayah 100. Why did they prostrate to Yusuf? They're worshipping him? That's tahiyyah. Adam alayhi salam, when the malaika makes sujood to Adam, what kind of sujood is that? Ta'zeeman, takreeman, tashrifan li'ilmihi. Right? That's what it is, not ibadah. Some people, they don't even know. Imam Munawi, he writes in Faisal Qadir, sujood of two types. Sujood of worship, no one, except for only for Allah. No one can do that for anyone else. And a sujood of honor. This is permissible for the people before us, not ours. That's what Allah told the angels to do for Adam. That's what Rasulullah was mentioning in this hadith. Ta'zeeman wa tashrif, not sujood al-ibadah. But some people, like we said, ignorant of the deen, they come and say, look, why is there a hadith telling that? We don't know what hadith you're reading, right? The hadith doesn't say that. And why am I saying this? The Rasulullah closed both doors, right? You can't do sujood al-ibadah, abadan. فَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَعْبُدُوا, only for Allah's sujood. And you can't make sujood as a tahiyyah to anyone anymore, because it was in the past and Allah's Messenger came with the Sharia Muhammadiyah, it's cancelled. So in the past you could do it, but you can't anymore. Why? Because it opens the door to shirk. You see, Islam comes to the diraya, close the doors. So, what is Ibn Abdul Qaadir saying here? Can you greet someone with sujood? No. There's a hadith, extension of this hadith, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he did this, right, when he came back from Sham, again there's khilaf on this riwayah, but when he did this, Rasulullah told him not to do it. Why Mu'adh was doing it? To show honor to him, right? But it's not allowed. If we understand sujood as being of two types, then sujood to worship as a worship can never only be done for Allah. Prostrating as an honor or a greeting cannot be done in Islam. So therefore, we're not allowed to do that. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to shake their hands. The author says, وَيُكْرَهُ تَقْبِيلُ الثَّرَى. It's also disliked to kiss the ground upon which someone is standing. Now, Islamically, we don't do this. No one kisses the ground, and we're not allowed to do that because it resembles sujood. And in the past, some scholars mentioned that some of these practices came from non-Arab or foreigners that would kiss the ground of those who are righteous or those who are leaders. It's not allowed in Islam. Right? Because in Islam, we can't do that for anyone. So that, even though this is not common nowadays, no human being should be doing that. In Islam, we've been taught how to greet one another. Added to this, the author now continues and says, وَيُكْرَهُ مِنْكَ الْإِنْحِنَاءُ مُسَلِّمًا وَتَقْبِيلُ الرَّأْسِ الْمَرْءِ حِلٌّ وَفِي الْيَدِ. It is dislike also for you to bow to someone else when greeting others, and kissing the head and the hand of a person is permitted. Now, in Islam, kissing the head and the hand, we'll talk about in a minute. But the issue now we're dealing with is the issue of bowing down to others. Not bowing in sujood, but ruku' or inhina'u, which is a type of bending you do for someone. So bowing. Now here the ulama, they have a discussion. What is the ruling on this practice? Firstly, we should know the asl, which is that when you greet another Muslim, you're not allowed to do anything but shaking their hand. If you're going to do anything beyond the salam, it's shaking their hand. Hadith Anas ibn Malik in Tirmidhi. So authentic hadith, Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was asked by a man, when we meet by a fellow brother or a friend, should I bow down to him? Like make bowing, as some cultures do. قال عليه الصلاة والسلام لا. He said, should I grab him and embrace him and kiss him? He said, no. He said, should I take his hand and shake it? He said, yes. This is all proof, the show. Asl, when you meet somebody, Assalamu alaikum, and you shake the hands. What about now if somebody bowed down to someone as a form of culture or greeting? And a good example of this is what we find nowadays in martial arts. When people, they bow to their opponent. Here the ulama have some differing opinion. What kind of bowing are we talking about? Al-inhina'u is not ruku'. Ruku' is when you bow, your back is straight 90 degrees. That's an ibadah only for Allah. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمُ ارْكَعُوا لَا يَرْكَعُونَ. Allah says when you tell the non-Muslim to make a ruku', they don't make a ruku'. وَارْكَعُوا مَعَ الرَّاكِعِينَ. Make a ruku', those who make a ruku', Allah says. Make salat al-jama'ah. Ruku' is ibadah lillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you don't do a full bowing, for example, you just bow your head and part of your back, is that haram or not? Here there's some khilaf between the ulama, but the strongest view is haram. It's important to know that some views say it's allowed, but those views, some of those scholars said that they put some conditions, and they said, those who allowed it, that it cannot be at the hadd of ruku'. So it's important you do a bowing which is not close to ruku' or less than ruku'. So not a fully ruku' and it's not sujood, it's somewhere close, just a little bit of bowing. Just like with someone to bend your head to someone. But in martial arts, you don't do that. You bend your head and your back. Right? You do it together a little bit. So is that allowed? Some scholars they said, but most of them said no. For example, Ibn Salah, Imam al-Nawawi. And so most of these scholars, Shaykh Islamic Taymiyyah, Al-Lajnat al-Da'ima, they all say it's not allowed for a Muslim to bow down, ruku', like a ruku' or other than ruku' because it's a type of ibadah. Another, in Mawsu' Fiqhiyya, said the ulama, they mentioned that the aada, if there's an aada that is there, a custom where people bow their heads or lower their heads or bow themselves, or their bodies, which is not to the level of ruku' when they're meeting each other, that person does not commit an act of disbelief by doing that, however, is disliked. Right? So that's why some of the ulama, they mentioned this. But some of the scholars, they said that no, it falls into the prohibition. Because the hadith where it says you shouldn't do it, it says you shouldn't do it. So obviously if someone did it, it's not kufr because they're not doing ruku'. But is it allowed? The best is not allowed. Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentioned Ibn Ruku' al-Naqas, right? Or Naqas al-Ruku', something that looks like ruku', but it's not. Even that is prohibited because the hadith Anas says, should we bow to them? The Prophet said no. And again, I go back to a point that I mentioned before. When it comes to adab, right, let me just finish what they mentioned as well. They bring the hadith and they say that the hadith shows that it's not allowed. As some of the ulama said, if someone is doing it out of honor or veneration for other than Allah, then obviously this is an act that kufr. But if it's not for that, it's not allowed, it's just disliked. Some of them say it's severely disliked. Alright? And some of them say it's just disliked, and some of them say it's prohibited. And the reason why, again, it's a side benefit, because we didn't mention it before, when we keep mentioning the ulama, why do they always say disliked when it comes to adab? And etiquette, why do they say it's disliked, its original ruling? Why don't they say it's prohibited? Because some of the usuliyun, they mention that when it comes to the bab adab, when it comes to etiquette, if something comes in the chapter of etiquette and says, do not do this, does the amr or nahi here, is it tahrimi or is it makruh tanzihi? Very good question. Is it, when you find an etiquette in the Quran and Sunnah, it says, do not do this, and it's etiquette, not ibadah, not ibadat, it's muamalat. Does it become haram or just disliked? This is where the usuliyun they discuss. Many of the usuliyun hold the view, if it's in the chapter of etiquettes and social practices, if the Prophet prohibited something, alayhi salatu wasalam, then it's only makruh, because it's min bab al-irshad. They say etiquettes or min bab al-irshad. What does that mean? The Prophet is telling you, irshad is directing you to the good etiquette. If you don't want to do it, what do you fall into? A dislike, bad manners or less than perfect etiquette, not haram. Many usuliyun, they hold that view or they mention that. Shaykh Uthaymeen, for example, others, they mention this. But some ulama differ with them and say, no, the Quran and Sunnah dictate when it's haram or not. And this seems to be a safer view, because if you say the asl is prohibitions fi bab al-adab is min bab al-irshad, is on makruh, sometimes the hadith says don't do it. I'll give you now an example. Okay, it's very important to understand. That's why every time we read the book, this poem, have you noticed? The Shaykh says it's disliked, it's disliked. But then when you look at the hadith, it says don't do it. And we know, those of us who studied usul al-fiqh with us, what's the ruling on command, prohibitions? Commands, they lead to, or the necessity, obligation. And prohibitions mean? Prohibitions, right? If it says don't do it, it's prohibited. Right? Don't, that means don't, haram. But here it becomes makruh. Example, eating with the left hand, is haram or is it makruh? Haram. But then they say, bab al-adab. Is it adab to eat with your right hand or not, left hand or not? So you see, some of the ulama, that's what some madhahib says, for makruh faqat. Not haram. Why? Bab al-adab. Adab is etiquette, bab al-irshad. But then some ulama said that's not correct. Why? Because if it was only makruh, why Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam made dua against the young boy who didn't do it? Why this young boy one day or something told him, eat with the left hand, right hand. He was eating the left. He said, I can't. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you'll never be able to. And he couldn't eat with his right hand again. Why did Rasulullah make dua against him? It was only makruh. Some of them, they respond by saying because he was being arrogant. But if you look carefully at the evidence, it's actually haram. Wallahu alam, is more haram, right? Haram to eat with left hand, not makruh. But now you understand where they're coming from. This is important to understand this chapter, because then you would understand when the ulama say makruh, they're not being easygoing. They're following certain qawa'id and usul. Therefore, bowing down to someone, bowing to them, which is not fully ruku', correct opinion is not allowed. Some scholars say disliked from this principle I mentioned, but the correct view is that it's still not allowed, because even if you told me it is not fully ruku', it's still the Prophet ﷺ told us not to do it, and we should avoid that. So someone should excuse themselves in martial arts and like this. If they have to bow down to someone, they cannot do that. As a Muslim, they should say, I'm not doing it, because it gets my faith tradition. Right? So okay, it's very important to understand. But if you hear someone say it's allowed, then you know where they're coming from. طيب, with that being said, Allah now says kissing the hand and the head, it is allowed. So what is he talking about here? In Islam, kissing the hand and the head of the ulama or the righteous is permissible. And there are many evidences to show that the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam allowed this, and the Sahaba would do it. Or that Tabi'un, they did it for the Sahaba. One hadith Shaykh Al-Albani brings authentically, one day the Jews came to Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they asked him a question, he answered it, and they began kissing his feet and his hands. So Shaykh Al-Albani actually brings a lot of evidence in the Sahih to prove the point that it's permissible to kiss the hand of a scholar, or the head of the scholar, or the righteous. And you find that when you see the aada, people when they meet the alim, you see everyone's kissing his head or his hand, and the scholar, they allow it. You mentioned in Hajjah, you mentioned in the explanation, Imam Ahmed, they would come to him, people would kiss his head, and he wouldn't object. But some scholars, they don't like it, so they don't want people doing that. So you know that that's out of their humility, not the prohibition. But what's not allowed to do is that when you meet somebody, you exchange salamu alaikum to kissing the hand. Kissing the hand is not tahiyyah that we know. When you shake someone's hand, when you meet them, you don't come and you stick your hand and you ask someone to kiss it, and that's how you give salam. Some groups, they took it to extremes. The shaykh, they are doing extra things, which are haram, that no one ever allowed. So understand that, the righteous and a scholar. And they also mention the opposite. Kissing the hand or the head of one who is not righteous or not honorable is not a good thing, because it gives the wrong impression to the people that this person is a good person, and people may get deceived by that. But Islam is permissible to do that. So it's good to know that, but also good to follow the custom. Right? So for example, some scholars, they permit it, others they're very strict, they don't like it. So you would know the Shaykh doesn't like it, I'm not going to do it, even though he is deserving of it. Shaykh Al-Bani himself, rahimahullah, wouldn't allow people to do it, even though he is deserving, he's an alim. But other scholars see, they don't mind it. So this is important to understand that. And the author now is going to move from there to hugging now. And so these are important social interactions. Muslims should know what you can and cannot do. He says in line 54 now, وَحَلَّ عِنَاقٌ لِلْمُرَاقِ تَدَيُّنًا وَيُكْرَهُ تَقْبِيلُ الْفَمِ الْإِفْهَمِ وَقَيِّدِ. It is permissible to hug another person, right? So a man hugging a man, a woman hugging a woman, as an act of religion. Something out of religion. You're doing it for Allah's sake. And it's disliked to kiss on the mouth, so understand and restrict this. So here the scholars, they talk about the issue of hugging. From the hadith Anas I just read to you guys earlier, as Muslims, when we meet one another, we don't always hug. That is not the sunnah. The sunnah, when you meet people, you give them your hand to shake. So one of the things scholars they warn against is continuously hugging when you meet someone, because that's not what the Prophet ﷺ told us to do. When he was asked about that, he said, he said, no, we shouldn't do that. Means, you do it sometimes. Examples of when you're allowed to hug one another when you meet, there's many examples, but the authentic example shows when you're coming back, someone came back from a travel. So Ibn Abdullah mentions the Rasul ﷺ when he saw Ja'far bin Abdul Muttalib, who came back from Habasha, from Abyssinia, عانقه النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. The Prophet ﷺ hugged him. It's authentic narration. Why did Rasul ﷺ hug him? Because he was away for so many years. And how many years? More than 10 years or more he was in Habasha. So when he finally saw him, he was so happy. That was I think the end of the battle of Khaybar, I believe, if I remember correctly. Also, Anas bin Malik reports that the Sahaba of the Messenger ﷺ would, if they met one another, they would shake each other's hand. And if one of them arrived from a travel, then they would hug one another. Reported by Al-Bukhari in Adab al-Mufrad, it's authentic. That's the correct way. See, when they met each other, i.e. residents, tasafahu, they would do that, shaking the hands. If they came back from a travel, then they would hug one another. But is it limited to only those occurrences? Can we add other things to that? So for example, can we add things like if I didn't see somebody for a very long time, or you love someone for the sake of Allah? So the ulama, they said, yes, there's more than just this. And Shaykh Al-Bani, he actually quotes in the Sharh Sunnah, Imam Al-Baghawi, he adds a few extra things. So Imam Al-Baghawi mentions, rahimahullah, and Shaykh Al-Bani adds this, he says very nice what he wrote, Imam Al-Baghawi, in Sharh Sunnah. He says that some of them said it's disliked to hug one another or to kiss one another on the cheek like this all the time when you meet. Rather, if some people are residents, you shouldn't do that. But it's permitted to do so when you're asking someone or you're bidding someone farewell. So for example, someone's about to travel, we know you can shake their hands from the hadith of Ibn Umar, but can I hug someone before they go? Yes, it's permissible. Also when they come back from travel, or when Baghawi says when you didn't see someone for a very long time, or someone who you love for Allah for the sake of Allah, all of that's permitted. So we add that as well because it's natural. You didn't see someone for 1 year after Corona. You're not going to hug the guy, that's more likely you would. That's okay. But if you see the person every day, he's hugging them, say, or all the residents, we see Salat al-Salah, it's not good. And it's for the men and the women. So brothers and sisters both. Sisters may hug each other more, it's not Islamic every time. Shaking the hands is better. That's the sunnah. As for kissing, we said that it's permissible to kiss in the cheeks, in some cultures they do, but a kissing on the mouth is not permitted. Right? And the Shaykh says makruh, and some scholars say it is not just makruh, it's not allowed. Sometimes they go for more than that, because it said this is a type of an adat which is not known to the Arab, and also it's something which is against the muru'ah. Because a person kisses his spouse on the lips, not a friend or like this. But the kissing on the cheek in some cultures, this is also considered. And there's many proofs for that. Right? Some cultures they do it, others they do it. It's from deen, some of them mentioned. To do that, if it's from a custom and something which is done for good in terms of greeting. But obviously, if someone notices they don't do that in their culture, then he follows the adat that they do. So this is regarding the hugging. So the emphasis here is that unless someone has a reason, like we just mentioned, it's not good to hug every time as residence. And you see your friend a lot, your fellow brother, you don't keep hugging them every time. And in terms of how to hug, some scholars interestingly mention that hugging is for you to put your neck on the right side of that person and that person come to your right side. Some of them they mention this, wallahu a'lam. They bring some ulama, they said this. But is there any dalil wadih? There's not dalil wadih. It's more to do with some of the ulama, they mention this. So when you hug someone, you go to the left side or you go to the right side. Some of us, we don't even know what we're doing, right? We go anywhere or whatever way. Some may say you go to the right side. Some ulama mention this. But to be honest, what is the meaning of hugging is just a hug. So sometimes they say it's actually not limited to that. Wallahu a'lam. So, continuing from there, we already mentioned the issue of hugging, yes, now, and we also mentioned the issue of the kissing on the cheek and like this, not the mouth. But now the author, he moves to mention now what to do with meeting someone and shaking hands. Line 55, he says, وَنَزْعُ يَدٍ مِمَّنْ يُسَافِحُ عَاجِلًا وَأَنْ يَتَنَاجَ الْجَمْعُ مَا دُونَ مُفْرَدِ. It's disliked to remove your hand quickly when you shake someone's hand, from the one who you're shaking the hand with. And it's also disliked for a group of people to converse in the exclusion of another. So now we take a benefit. If two people are speaking, when two people are shaking their hands, the sunnah is, Rasulullah sunnah, whenever he shook someone's hand, he would be the last one to remove his hand. And it's Malik, Sahih and Adab Mufrad. It mentions, وَمَا رَأَيْتُ رَجُلًا أَخَذَ بِيَدِهِ فَتَرَكَ يَدَهُ حَتَّى يَكُونَ الرَّجُلُ هُوَ الَّذِي يَدِعُ يَدَهُ. The Sahabi said, never saw someone take the hand of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, except that man withdrew his hand before the Rasul withdrew his hand. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he shook someone's hand, he would remain holding the person's hand and shaking it until they withdrew their hand. That's the sunnah. Now the ulama said, what do you do then when you meet someone? He said, dislike the shaykh. But obviously, if both parties just holding people's hands, for a while, it's going to be problematic. So some of the ulama said the one who initiated, after a while, he's the one who removes, if no one's going to remove. Some scholars say that. While others say that you try to hold longer until the other person moves, because the Rasul used to do that. But obviously, with all that being said, you don't make commotion and problems, right? Because at the end of the day, it's only makruh, right? Not haram. And so this is a sunnah showing the Rasul excellent etiquette. A warm welcome he had for people, he would continue shaking their hand, because what's the benefit behind that? The sins continue falling, right? There's also a benefit we continue to shake our hands, but obviously at one point, we see the Rasul was not someone who would shake people's hands quickly and move it. He wasn't cold, he was warm and welcoming. And this is the etiquette we learned. Rasul how he dealt with people, he always made them feel welcome. And often a greeting that you will notice, that he makes you feel special. This is how Rasul used to be. Now the Shaykh talks about the issue of people conversing in the exclusion of another. It comes in the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar. Rasul said that it is not allowed for three people to be talking, or two people from a group of three to be talking in exclusion of the third. All right, so if you have three people, all of them have to talk together. Not two people are talking and the other one is excluded. So Abdullah ibn Umar, he narrated the hadith, and he showed the Rasul said, why? Because it's going to make the other person feel sad. See, it's important. Islam takes the feelings of people into consideration. You can't say it doesn't matter. No, if the two of us are talking and we're not talking to the third person, he feels left out. So how you solve that? Abdullah ibn Umar, one day he was talking to someone. It was three of them, and someone to talk to him, so he called the fourth person, and then they went two and two. So he would talk to this person, the other guy gets to talk to that person. That's how you do it. And it doesn't matter if you have more people or less. So for example, 3, or if it's 5, or if it's 7, as long as one person is excluded, either you talk all together or you don't talk. This is the best. And so is Islam, social etiquette. Imagine you're sitting together and one guy is left out of the conversation. Even now, it's not considered good etiquette. Added to this, the ulama, they mention also it is not allowed to speak, two people to speak together in their language and the third person doesn't know it. Many of the ulama in the past, they mentioned in the sharh of the hadith, including that, speaking other languages the other person doesn't know. So if two people are speaking Arabic, Shaykh Ibn mentioned, the third one doesn't know, you're not allowed. All of you speak Arabic, all speak a language you know. And same thing, any other language, Urdu or anything else. And this happens quite a bit. You see two people who want to see something privately, then it's going to sadden the other guy because you think you talk about him. Shaitan's hadith. If you're talking to a different language, they talk about me. And even if they're not talking about you, it's not etiquette. If they have to share a secret, then what do? They tell the third person, you got to tell them something. So that's okay. Then they go and they do it. What if the third person doesn't care? And some of us, mashallah, was strong character. So I'm not going to get sad. Two guys talking, I have my phone. I can go on that. What's the ruling of that? For example, three of you in the car, two guys talking, the other guy's on his phone. It's not the best. But Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah said, rahimahullah, in his explanation, Bulugh al-Maram, and believe, if the person's strong character, it's not haram. Like some people say, it's okay. You guys want to talk, I'm out of the conversation. But it's not good for us to start a conversation, we ignore them. Right? We notice that. When you deal with people, you have to take into mura'at to the person. If someone is okay, he's doing something else, it's okay. We can talk, he's on his phone, and he's okay, he's not bothered by it. But sometimes you may notice we're just talking, we forgot the person. So we got to talk all together. This is etiquette of Islam. This is how high morals that we have. On top of the Shaykh says, وَأَنْ يَجْلِسَ الْإِنسَانُ عِنْدَ مُحَدِّثٍ بِسِرٍّ وَقِيلَ حُضُرٍ وَإِنْ يَأْذِنِ اُقْعِدِي. It's also disliked for a person to sit next to somebody else who's sharing a secret with someone else. But if and some scholars say it's prohibited, but if you permits them to sit, then it's allowed. So for example, somebody's sitting down sharing a secret with someone or is talking to us privately, you can't just come and sit next to them. You're not allowed. You have to seek permission. Can I sit there next to you? They said no, you have to leave. They say yes, you can. So when the mistake may happen, you see somebody conversing there, or let's say they're in the office, just come and just sit down uninvited. It's not. You have to knock and ask. And if they don't permit you, you have to go. Otherwise, the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, anhuma, Rasulullah said, whoever tries to listen to people's speech or listen to their speech and they dislike him to do it, Allah will fill his ears with molten lead yawm al-qiyamah. So this includes people who spy on others, and those people who record people's conversations without permission, and those who sit when people are speaking privately. Now, how do you know if someone's speaking privately or not? Well, if there are two people talking, what do you do? If you want to get involved, you said, do you mind I stand with you or talk with you? They said, no, they have to walk. You don't just come in there and interrupt the conversation. Maybe the guy is talking about some serious problem, now you just started getting the information. So in Islam, you have to be careful as well with that. Same thing, if you see somebody, is far away, let them finish what they're doing. So it's very important not to get involved when you're not allowed. Next line, so these are all etiquettes, social etiquettes we as Muslims have to implement to up the level of our society. The last two lines, now the author moves to a discussion of shaking the hands of older women or women and men. وَإِمْرَأَ عَجُوزٍ لَمْ تُرَدْ وِصَافَحَهَا أو وصافحها وخلوتها أكره لا تحيتها إشهدي وامرأة عجوز, he says ومرأة عجوز, an old woman, لم ترد, it's not been reported or is not who does not desire وصفاحها, يعني who's not desiring to get married. If there's an older woman who is not at the age where she's trying to get married, عجوز, the old woman, قواعد من النساء, those women who are past the age of desiring marriage and like this, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has special ahkam for them in terms of their hijab, means they have certain ahkam when they reach that age. But the idea is that kind of woman, he says وَخَلْوَتَهَا أُكْرُهُ, it is disliked to shake their hands with them and to be in seclusion with them, but not disliked to greet them. Here the Shaykh gets into a khilaf between the ulama, especially Madhab Imam Ahmad, Hanbali Madhab. Is there a difference between shaking the hand of an old woman or a young woman? Is there a difference opinion between secluding yourself with an older woman or a younger woman? Here, the madhab, they have two views. Imam Ahmad has two riwayat. One that it's makruh if it's older woman, and haram if it's younger woman. And other riwayat says haram both ways. And this seems to be more stronger in there, in the madhab or also outside of the madhab. And so the author is teaching us that when it comes to older women, it's not allowed to shake their hands, not to be secluded with them, just like any other woman. Khalwa is to be in a secluded place with a woman where no one can see you or hear you or enter upon you. specifically see you enter upon you. And why did the ulama mention this? Is because this is the third person will be with shaitan, right? So when it comes to older women, why did the ulama, some of them differentiate? Why did they permit this? They said because the older woman doesn't have desire for marriage, there's not much fitna. But the younger woman, there's a fitna. But truth be told, it could still be fitna. And so here, the Shaykh in the next line says, وَتَشْمِيتَهَا. It's not disliked to reply to the sneeze of the older woman. But both others, وَكْرُهُ كِلَا خَصْرَتَيْنِ لِلشَّبَابِ. But both, replying to a sneeze, shaking the hands, being secluded, is all prohibited for younger people of both genders. So this is a position of some of the ulama of the Hanbali madhab, like we said. And unfortunately, in today's time, ikhwani, some people, they take these views and they try to then give them big weight. And they give them weight and say, it's not as black and white. You may hear some contemporary du'at who are struggling in telling people what's halal and haram. Go towards these kind of viewpoints and popularize them. And my advice to the brothers and sisters who are listening, nowadays there's a lot of doubts, a lot of opinions on the table. The student of knowledge and the regular Muslim, one of the etiquettes that we need to teach ourselves, when you hear something, you don't immediately become confused. There's more than one view. There's always going to be maybe a second view or third view on a topic. Sometimes there are views that you never heard before and they're actually legitimate, coming from ulama who are actually reliable, past and present. But what do you do when you have these different views? You must investigate, you must embark on a journey of investigation. Investigating, number one, the evidences, if you're capable. There are sources, who said and where, what book. Thirdly, which one is more correct? You see, what happens nowadays, people may say there's two views, like one famous da'i I was listening to in the Western world, teaching the permissibility of shaking the hands of older women. It's not, shaking the hands of women is not that bad of a thing, it's a khilaf. And the reason why people are bringing these views is in order to move the people away from what they're doing, which is better, right? Staying away from it, because the hadith show it, and problematizing it, saying those who say it's absolutely haram are strict and hardliners, or extremists. There's different views. The question is, why are we giving priority and primacy to weaker views? Always remember, every opinion in mas'ala fiqh doesn't mean it's correct. Right? And perhaps next week I will get into all the evidences, because I want to talk about this specifically, because it's online. If you don't know, you go online, click a video, the shaykh will tell you this and this, and you get confused. Alright, so about salat time is coming, and so I'm going to leave this part maybe next week, more in detail. How do you respond to those views? What are they? Why are people saying it? But I want to finish with, people, they do this because they think that these views, if it's fiqh related, it's not a big deal. Aqeedah is something else. But truth be told, they do both. There's always an opinion which is rajih and one which is marjuh. Always remember, two opinions or more. One opinion is given weight and precedence, and another is weak. Which one it is depends on shaykh to shaykh, but evidences. So inshallah next week we will take this, because some people, they don't understand this. So inshallah we'll take some of the questions. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Not sure if this answered already, but can non-mahrams give salam to each other? We'll take that one next week, because I want to explain this issue first, and then we'll take that question. Question says, what's the third point when it comes to different views? So first we should know there's always different views on the table for fiqh. There's always more than one view. And number two, you have to check the evidences. Thirdly, check the sources. Which shaykhs or ulama said this? And fourthly, you have to check which of the two views is more accurate. So it's not about just knowing multiple views. Check for the sources. Inshallah, because of the time, maybe we'll take some of the questions after, inshallah, because the salat time is coming in. And inshallah, we'll pick up from here next week on this topic, specifically, بإذن الله تعالى. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.